ReWork Your Life, the productivity system nobody teaches you. Published by Profound Audiobook. Introduction. A broken productivity system can quietly waste years of a person's life. Days become filled with constant activity, endless notifications, unfinished tasks, mental exhaustion, and the uncomfortable feeling of always being busy while rarely moving forward. Modern life rewards speed, urgency, and non-stop motion, but very little attention is given to clarity, focus, or meaningful progress. As a result, many people wake up every morning already overwhelmed, distracted before the day even begins, and emotionally drained by lives that no longer feel intentional. Productivity was never supposed to feel this exhausting. Real productivity is not about squeezing more tasks into your schedule or turning yourself into a machine that never rests. It is about learning how to direct your energy, attention, and time toward what truly matters. It is about creating systems that support your goals instead of constantly working against them. And most importantly, it is about building a life that feels focused, purposeful, and mentally clear instead of chaotic and reactive. Along this audiobook, we will rebuild the way you work, think, focus, and live. You will learn why traditional productivity advice often fails in the real world, how distractions quietly weaken your potential, and why motivation alone is never enough to create lasting discipline. We will explore the hidden connection between focus, habits, emotional energy, deep work, intentional routines, and meaningful success. You will also learn how to escape reactive living, simplify your mind, reclaim your attention, and create systems that make productivity feel sustainable instead of overwhelming. This is not a book about becoming endlessly busy. It is a book about becoming intentional, because the quality of your future will depend greatly on how well you learn to protect your focus, direct your energy, and spend your time. A distracted life rarely creates meaningful results, but a focused life can quietly transform everything. Chapter 1. Stop mistaking motion for progress. Constant movement can create the dangerous illusion that your life is moving forward when, in reality, you are simply staying occupied. Modern life rewards busyness so aggressively that many people no longer stop to ask whether the things filling their schedules are actually improving their future. They wake up overwhelmed, rush through endless tasks, respond to non-stop notifications, and collapse into bed exhausted at night, believing they had a productive day simply because they stayed busy. But being busy and being productive are not the same thing. A person can spend an entire day working without creating meaningful progress. That is one of the biggest traps of modern productivity culture. Activity feels productive because it creates movement, stimulation, and urgency. It gives the mind a sense of importance. But movement alone does not guarantee results. You can answer emails for hours, attend meetings all day, organize small tasks endlessly, and still avoid the deeper work that would actually change your life. Many people stay busy specifically because busyness protects them from confronting what truly matters. Real productivity often looks quieter than people expect. It requires focus, clarity, and intention. It requires knowing which actions genuinely move your life forward and which actions simply consume time. This is difficult because shallow tasks are emotionally easier. Quick replies, small errands, and constant multitasking provide instant stimulation and temporary satisfaction. Deep work, on the other hand, demands concentration and discomfort. It forces you to think clearly, make decisions, and confront meaningful goals directly. That is why many people unconsciously choose busyness over progress. Busyness feels easier than focused responsibility. Garrett Nolan understood this problem better than he wanted to admit. At 38 years old, he worked as a logistics coordinator for a transportation company in Denver. His entire day felt non-stop. From the moment he arrived at the office, his attention was constantly pulled in different directions. Emails flooded his inbox every few minutes. Meetings interrupted his schedule repeatedly. Phone calls, scheduling issues, and last-minute problems consumed nearly every hour of the day. By the time he returned home at night, He felt mentally exhausted. Yet, despite constantly working, Garrett secretly felt stuck. He kept telling himself he was simply too busy to focus on bigger goals. For years he talked about improving his finances, exercising regularly, and eventually starting a consulting business of his own. But every evening he felt too drained to make progress on anything meaningful. One afternoon, after spending nearly 6 straight hours answering emails and sitting through meetings, Garrett looked at his task list and realized something uncomfortable. Almost nothing he had done that day truly moved his future forward. He had been active all day but not effective. His schedule was full, but his progress was empty. That realization forced him to confront an uncomfortable truth. Much of his busyness had become reactive rather than intentional. Instead of directing his attention consciously, he spent most of his day responding to whatever demanded immediate attention. Over time, urgency had replaced importance. He was constantly putting out small fires while neglecting the deeper work that could actually improve his life. Many people are trapped inside the same cycle. They confuse exhaustion with accomplishment. They assume that because they feel tired, they must have been productive. But exhaustion alone proves nothing. A distracted person can become exhausted very quickly while accomplishing very little that truly matters. The question is not only whether you are working hard. The question is whether your effort is aligned with meaningful priorities. One of the most important productivity skills you can develop is the ability to separate important work from urgent noise. Urgent tasks often scream for attention immediately, but important work quietly shapes your future over time. Improving your health, learning valuable skills, building meaningful relationships, strengthening your finances, and focusing deeply on long-term goals rarely feel urgent in the moment. Yet these are the very things that eventually determine the quality of your life. This is why intentional focus matters so deeply. Productivity is not about doing everything. It is about doing the right things consistently. A person who spends one focused hour on meaningful work often accomplishes more than someone who spends an entire distracted day reacting to interruptions. Depth creates results. Clarity creates progress. You must also learn to stop glorifying exhaustion. Modern culture often celebrates overwork and constant availability as signs of ambition, but endless busyness can become another form of avoidance. Some people stay busy because slowing down would force them to confront the uncomfortable truth that they are drifting without direction. Real progress requires reflection. It requires stepping back and asking yourself difficult questions about how your time is actually being spent. Your future will not be shaped by how busy you appear. It will be shaped by what you consistently give your attention to. Every day, you are either investing your time into meaningful progress or allowing distraction and urgency to quietly consume your life. The difference between those two paths may seem small in the moment, but over time, it changes everything. Chapter 2. Reclaim your attention before the world steals it. Attention has become one of the most valuable resources in modern life, yet many people give it away carelessly every single day. Every notification, advertisement, social media feed, headline, video, message, and interruption competes aggressively for mental space. The modern world is designed to keep people distracted because distracted people are easier to influence, easier to entertain, and easier to control. As a result, many individuals no longer direct their attention consciously. Their focus is constantly being pulled from one thing to another until mental clarity slowly disappears. The dangerous part is that distraction rarely feels destructive in the moment. A few minutes on your phone seems harmless. Checking one notification feels insignificant. Watching one short video appears harmless at first. But modern distraction is powerful because it happens repeatedly throughout the day. Tiny interruptions slowly train the brain to avoid stillness, avoid deep thinking, and avoid sustained concentration. Over time, many people lose the ability to focus fully on anything for very long. Their attention becomes fragmented, restless, and emotionally dependent on stimulation. This constant mental interruption creates consequences people often fail to recognize immediately. Productivity weakens because focused work becomes harder to maintain. Creativity declines because the mind never stays quiet long enough to think deeply. Emotional exhaustion increases because the brain rarely gets genuine rest. Even simple tasks begin feeling difficult because attention has been trained to constantly shift instead of fully engage. Vanessa Hale experienced this problem without fully realizing how serious it had become. At 31 years old, she worked remotely as an insurance support assistant in Phoenix. At first, working from home felt flexible and convenient, but gradually, her days became filled with constant distractions. While answering work emails, she checked social media repeatedly. During meetings, she scrolled through short videos in the background. Even while watching television at night, she simultaneously switched between multiple apps on her phone. Her mind was always occupied, but rarely focused. At first, Vanessa told herself she was simply multitasking efficiently, but over time, she noticed her concentration becoming weaker. Tasks that once took 30 minutes now stretched into hours because she constantly interrupted herself. She struggled to finish books, forgot important details during conversations, and felt mentally exhausted even on relatively calm days. What troubled her most was the growing feeling that her mind no longer felt clear. She constantly felt scattered, distracted, and emotionally overstimulated. One afternoon, after rereading the same email several times because she could not focus long enough to process it properly, Vanessa realized something uncomfortable. She had slowly trained herself to become distracted all the time. Her attention no longer belonged to her. It belonged to whatever demanded stimulation in the moment. That realization frightened her because she understood how much of her mental energy was being wasted every day without purpose. Many people are living the same way. They wake up and immediately consume information before their minds are fully awake. Notifications interrupt their mornings. Social media consumes their attention throughout the day. Entertainment fills every quiet moment. Even moments of boredom are immediately escaped through screens and stimulation. The result is a mind that rarely experiences stillness, clarity, or sustained focus. One of the greatest consequences of constant distraction is that it weakens intentional living. A distracted mind struggles to think long-term because attention is always trapped in the present moment. Important goals require sustained focus, patience, and mental clarity, but distraction pulls attention toward whatever feels easiest or most stimulating right now. Over time, people become reactive instead of intentional. They stop directing their lives consciously because their attention is constantly controlled externally. Reclaiming your attention begins with awareness. You must start observing where your mental energy goes every day. How often do you interrupt yourself unnecessarily? How much time disappears into endless scrolling, meaningless content, or constant notifications? How often are you fully present during conversations, work, reading, or important moments? Many people are shocked when they honestly examine how fragmented their attention has become. Protecting your focus requires boundaries. You cannot expect mental clarity while constantly feeding your mind noise and interruption. This may require reducing unnecessary notifications, spending less time on social media, creating distraction-free work periods, or allowing yourself moments of silence without reaching for entertainment immediately. At first, this can feel uncomfortable because the brain becomes accustomed to constant stimulation, but over time, your ability to focus deeply begins strengthening again. Attention shapes the quality of your life, because whatever consistently receives your focus eventually shapes your thoughts, emotions, habits, and future. A distracted life often becomes a reactive life, but a focused life becomes intentional. When you reclaim control over your attention, you begin reclaiming control over your time, your energy, your productivity, and ultimately your direction in life. Your future will be heavily influenced by what you repeatedly allow into your mind. Every distraction carries a cost. Every interruption steals small pieces of focus and clarity, and while these moments may appear insignificant individually, together they slowly determine whether your mind becomes stronger, calmer, and more intentional, or increasingly scattered, restless, and overwhelmed. The world will continue fighting for your attention every day. The question is whether you will consciously protect it or continue allowing distraction to quietly shape the direction of your life. Chapter 3. Build a life that runs on systems, not feelings. Feelings are unreliable leaders. Some days you feel motivated, energized and focused. Other days you feel tired, distracted, discouraged or emotionally drained. If your productivity depends entirely on how you feel, your consistency will always rise and fall with your emotions. This is one of the biggest reasons people struggle to create lasting progress. They rely too heavily on temporary motivation instead of building systems that continue working even when motivation disappears. Modern culture often glorifies motivation as though it is the secret to success. People wait for inspiration before taking action. They expect themselves to feel excited before becoming disciplined. But highly productive people do not build their lives around emotional states. They build systems. Systems reduce dependence on mood because they create structure, repetition, and clarity. Instead of constantly deciding what to do next, systems automate important behaviors, so progress continues more naturally. A productive system is simply a repeatable way of doing things that supports your goals consistently. Morning routines, work schedules, exercise habits, budgeting methods, focused work blocks, and organized environments are all examples of systems. These structures may appear simple on the surface, but over time, they dramatically influence the quality of a person's life. Systems matter because human beings naturally fall back on routines during stressful or difficult periods. If your routines are weak, your life becomes chaotic. If your routines are strong, your life becomes more stable and intentional. Travis Monroe learned this lesson after years of frustration with himself. At 34 years old, he worked as a freelance animator in Nashville. He was creative, talented, and ambitious, but his life lacked consistency completely. Some weeks he worked intensely for long hours and completed projects successfully. Other weeks he procrastinated constantly, missed deadlines, and wasted entire days distracted online. His income fluctuated because his productivity fluctuated. He kept telling himself he simply needed more motivation or better discipline, but nothing changed for very long. What frustrated Travis most was that he genuinely wanted success. He bought productivity books, watched motivational videos, and created ambitious goals repeatedly. But every new burst of inspiration eventually faded. Once the excitement disappeared, old habits returned quickly. He stayed up too late, woke up without structure, wasted time online, and delayed important projects until stress forced him to work frantically again. His life became an exhausting cycle of temporary motivation, followed by inconsistency. One evening after missing an important client deadline, Travis experienced a moment of painful honesty. He realized his problem was not lack of ambition. His problem was that his entire life depended on emotion. When he felt inspired, he worked. When he did not feel inspired, everything collapsed. That realization changed the way he viewed productivity completely. Instead of chasing motivation again, Travis started building simple systems into his daily life. He created fixed work hours, removed distractions from his workspace, planned tasks the night before, and committed to beginning work at the same time every morning, regardless of how he felt emotionally. At first, the changes felt uncomfortable and repetitive, but over time, something surprising happened. His productivity became more stable because his behavior was no longer controlled entirely by emotion. This is the hidden power of systems. They create consistency during emotional fluctuations. A person with strong systems does not waste mental energy constantly negotiating with themselves every day. They already know what needs to happen because the structure has been decided in advance. This reduces decision fatigue, which quietly drains enormous amounts of mental energy. The more decisions you must repeatedly make throughout the day, the more mentally exhausted you become. Systems simplify life by reducing unnecessary choices. Systems also help people maintain progress during difficult seasons. Motivation often disappears when life becomes stressful, painful, or emotionally overwhelming. But routines can continue even when emotions feel unstable. A person may not feel motivated to exercise every day, but a strong routine increases the likelihood that exercise still happens. A writer may not always feel creatively inspired, but a consistent writing system keeps work moving forward, regardless of temporary feelings. One important truth to understand is that systems do not need to be complicated to be effective. In fact, simpler systems are often more sustainable. Many people fail because they create unrealistic routines that become exhausting to maintain. Real productivity is built through consistency, not intensity. Small, repeatable actions performed consistently over time create stronger long-term results than dramatic bursts of effort followed by burnout. Your environment also plays a major role in supporting systems. Human behavior is heavily influenced by surroundings. A cluttered environment encourages distraction. Constant notifications encourage interruption. Poor sleep habits weaken focus and discipline. Productive people intentionally design environments that make good habits easier and bad habits harder. This reduces reliance on willpower alone. A life built entirely on emotion becomes unstable, but a life supported by intentional systems becomes more focused, calm, and productive. Systems protect your future from your temporary moods. They allow progress to continue even when motivation fades. And over time, these consistent routines quietly shape identity itself. You do not rise to the level of your goals repeatedly. You often fall to the level of your systems. That is why lasting productivity is not built through occasional inspiration. It is built through intentional structures, repeated long enough that discipline becomes part of who you are. Chapter 4. Remove the habits that quietly exhaust you. Exhaustion is not always caused by hard work. Sometimes it is caused by the way a person lives. Many people assume they need more motivation, more discipline, or more time, when the real problem is that their daily habits are quietly draining their energy before meaningful work even begins. Small repeated behaviors shape mental clarity, emotional stability, focus, and productivity far more than most people realize. Over time, unhealthy routines slowly weaken performance until even simple responsibilities begin feeling overwhelming. One of the biggest misunderstandings about productivity is the belief that productivity is only about managing time. In reality, productivity is deeply connected to energy. A person with high energy and mental clarity can accomplish more in 2 focused hours than an exhausted person can accomplish in an entire distracted day. That is why protecting your energy matters so much. When your mind and body are constantly depleted, discipline becomes harder, focus becomes weaker, and motivation disappears quickly. Modern life quietly encourages habits that exhaust people mentally and physically. Poor sleep has become normal. Constant screen exposure has become normal. Overstimulation has become normal. Eating without intention, multitasking constantly, staying mentally connected to work every hour of the day, and consuming endless information without rest have all become accepted parts of modern culture. The problem is that the human mind was never designed to operate under non-stop stimulation without recovery. Lindsay Barrett understood this reality after years of feeling mentally drained without understanding why. At 36 years old, she worked as a legal assistant for a busy law office in Chicago. Her work required constant attention to detail, communication, and organization. Every day she handled schedules, documents, deadlines, and client requests while trying to stay ahead of non-stop responsibilities. She considered herself hard-working and responsible, but privately she felt exhausted almost all the time. At first, Lindsay blamed her workload completely. She assumed her job was simply demanding, but gradually she began noticing that her exhaustion extended beyond work itself. She stayed up late every night scrolling through social media and watching videos because it felt like her only way to relax. She slept poorly, skipped meals during busy days, relied heavily on caffeine, and rarely allowed her mind any genuine rest. Even when she had free time, she filled it with more stimulation. Her apartment remained cluttered, because she constantly felt too tired to organize it. Over time, the mental chaos surrounding her began affecting everything else. One Saturday morning, Lindsay woke up feeling exhausted, despite sleeping nearly 9 hours. She looked around her cluttered apartment, checked her phone immediately, and felt mentally overwhelmed before the day had even started. In that moment, she realized something uncomfortable. Her life had quietly become built around habits that continuously drained her energy instead of restoring it. She was trying to stay productive while living in a way that constantly exhausted her mind and body. That realization changed her perspective completely. Lindsay began making small but intentional adjustments to her lifestyle. She improved her sleep schedule, reduced late-night screen time, organized her living space, and created moments during the day where her mind could actually rest without stimulation. None of these changes were dramatic individually, but together they slowly transformed her energy, focus, and emotional stability. What surprised her most was how much easier productivity became once exhaustion stopped controlling her daily life. Many people are living in constant low-level burnout without fully realizing it. Their minds rarely experience silence. Their bodies rarely recover properly. Their attention is constantly fragmented by distraction and overstimulation. Then they wonder why they struggle to focus, complete important work, or feel emotionally stable. The issue is not always laziness. Sometimes the issue is depletion. Clutter is another hidden source of exhaustion people often ignore. A chaotic environment creates subtle mental stress because the brain constantly processes unfinished visual information. Disorganized spaces make it harder to think clearly and focus deeply. The same is true for overloaded schedules and constant commitments. When every part of life feels crowded, the mind never fully relaxes. Emotional habits also drain energy quietly. Constant worry, overthinking, resentment, comparison, and self-criticism consume enormous mental resources. A person can become emotionally exhausted without doing much physical work at all. This is why protecting mental energy matters just as much as managing physical energy. A calm, focused mind naturally performs better than an overstimulated and emotionally overwhelmed one. One of the most important productivity skills you can develop is learning the difference between recovery and distraction. Many people believe they are resting when they are actually overstimulating themselves further. Endless scrolling, constant entertainment, and non-stop information may temporarily distract the mind, but they rarely restore it deeply. Real recovery often involves simplicity, quiet, sleep, reflection, movement, healthy routines, mental space. Your habits are either creating energy or draining it. Every repeated behavior is shaping your ability to focus, think clearly, and work effectively. Small unhealthy routines may appear harmless in isolation, but over time they accumulate into exhaustion, distraction, and mental fog. The opposite is also true. Small healthy habits repeated consistently create clarity, resilience, and sustainable productivity. A productive life cannot be built on constant depletion. You cannot expect long-term focus from a mind that never rests properly, or expect strong performance from a body constantly running on exhaustion. If you want to improve the quality of your work, you must also improve the quality of the systems supporting your energy. Because meaningful productivity is not only about working harder, it is about living in a way that allows your mind and body to perform at their best consistently over time. Chapter 5. Escape reactive living. A reactive life is a life controlled by interruption, urgency, and outside pressure. Instead of consciously directing their days, many people spend nearly all of their time responding to notifications, responding to emails, responding to stress, responding to other people's demands. Their attention moves constantly from one immediate problem to another until they eventually lose the ability to think clearly about what truly matters. Over time, this way of living creates mental exhaustion because the mind never feels settled or intentional. Reactive living often feels productive because it creates constant movement. A person answers messages quickly, solves small problems all day, and stays busy handling whatever appears in front of them. But constant reaction slowly steals long-term focus. It forces people to live in a permanent state of urgency, where immediate pressure becomes more important than meaningful progress. The dangerous part is that this lifestyle becomes normalized. Many people no longer realize how reactive they have become, because modern life rewards responsiveness more than reflection. One of the clearest signs of reactive living is when your priorities constantly change, depending on whatever feels urgent in the moment. You begin the day with important goals, but distractions quickly take control. Hours disappear, handling small problems, while the deeper work that could improve your future remains untouched. This creates frustration because people feel constantly occupied, while simultaneously feeling stuck. Their lives become filled with activity, but lacking in direction. Cole Matthews understood this cycle all too well. At 39 years old, he worked as a restaurant supervisor in Houston. His days were unpredictable from the moment he arrived at work. Staff problems, customer complaints, inventory shortages, scheduling conflicts, equipment failures, and endless last-minute emergencies consumed his attention every day. He moved constantly from one issue to another without pause. At first, Cole believed this constant pressure simply came with responsibility. He took pride in his ability to handle chaos quickly. But over time, the chaos followed him everywhere. Even outside work, his mind remained trapped in reactive mode. He checked work messages constantly, struggled to relax, and felt mentally exhausted all the time. He stopped planning for his future because he barely felt capable of managing the present. Personal goals disappeared completely. His health declined because he relied on fast food and poor sleep just to keep functioning. What disturbed him most was the growing feeling that he was no longer directing his own life. He was simply reacting to it. One evening after another stressful shift, Cole sat alone in his car before driving home. For the first time in years, he asked himself a difficult question. When was the last time I intentionally decided how I wanted my life to look? The answer unsettled him because he honestly could not remember. For years, his life had been controlled almost entirely by reaction and urgency. Every day felt like survival instead of direction. That moment became an important turning point. Cole began recognizing that constant urgency had trained his mind to operate in a permanent state of emotional tension. He realized he had become addicted to reacting because reacting felt necessary and familiar. Slowing down felt uncomfortable because his mind no longer knew how to operate without pressure. But slowly, he began rebuilding intentionality into his life. He started planning his days more carefully, setting boundaries around work communication, organizing priorities before distractions appeared, and protecting time for rest and long-term goals. The changes were not dramatic overnight, but gradually his mind became calmer and more focused. What surprised him most was that intentional structure actually improved his performance. Instead of constantly feeling overwhelmed, he became more thoughtful, organized, and emotionally stable because his attention was no longer controlled entirely by emergencies. Reactive living damages productivity because it weakens clarity. When your mind constantly jumps between interruptions, it becomes difficult to focus deeply on meaningful work. Long-term thinking disappears because the brain becomes trapped in short-term survival mode. Important goals require patience, focus, and strategic thinking, but reactive living keeps people emotionally trapped in the present moment. This way of living also creates emotional exhaustion because the nervous system rarely experiences calm. Constant urgency trains the body to remain tense and overstimulated. Many people no longer know how to truly rest because their minds remain mentally connected to stress all the time. Even moments of silence feel uncomfortable because the brain has become dependent on stimulation and reaction. Escaping reactive living requires intentional control over your attention and priorities. You must begin deciding what deserves your energy before distractions decide for you. This means creating structure around your days, protecting focused time, reducing unnecessary interruptions, and becoming more conscious about how you spend your mental energy. It also means accepting that not everything requires an immediate response. One of the most powerful productivity skills you can develop is learning to pause before reacting. Reactive people operate automatically. Intentional people think carefully before giving attention away. They understand that attention is valuable and limited. Every unnecessary interruption weakens focus and steals energy that could have been directed toward meaningful progress. A calmer life does not mean an inactive life. Intentional people still work hard, handle responsibilities, and solve problems. The difference is that they no longer allow urgency to completely control their minds. They create direction instead of constantly living in reaction. Your future will always be shaped by what consistently receives your focus. If your life remains controlled entirely by interruption, urgency, and distraction, meaningful progress becomes difficult to sustain. But when you begin living intentionally, instead of reactively, your mind becomes clearer, your energy becomes more stable, and your actions become aligned with the future you actually want to build. Chapter 6. Guard your focus ruthlessly. Focus has become one of the rarest abilities in modern life. Every day, people are surrounded by interruptions competing aggressively for their attention. Phones vibrate constantly, messages appear endlessly. Social media trains the mind to jump rapidly from one stimulus to another. Even during moments that require concentration, many people still feel the urge to check notifications, switch tasks, or search for quick stimulation. Over time, this constant fragmentation weakens the mind's ability to focus deeply on anything meaningful. The dangerous part is that distraction often feels normal because it has become so common. Many individuals no longer realize how scattered their attention has become. They attempt to work while simultaneously checking messages, browsing online, listening to content, and thinking about several unrelated things at once. Then they wonder why they feel mentally exhausted after accomplishing very little. A distracted mind consumes enormous energy because constant task switching forces the brain to repeatedly restart focus. Focus is powerful because it creates depth. When attention remains fully directed toward one meaningful task, the quality of thinking improves dramatically. Ideas become clearer, decisions become stronger, work becomes more effective. But deep concentration requires protection because the modern world constantly tries to interrupt it. If you do not intentionally guard your focus, distractions will quietly consume the best parts of your mental energy every day. Abigail Turner understood this struggle during one of the most demanding seasons of her life. At 27 years old, she was completing graduate school while working part-time at a university library in Boston. Her workload was intense, and she constantly felt behind. Assignments piled up faster than she could complete them. She spent long hours studying, yet her productivity remained inconsistent. What frustrated her most was that she genuinely cared about her education, but her attention constantly drifted. While trying to study, Abigail checked social media repeatedly. Small distractions quickly turned into long interruptions. She switched constantly between research, messages, videos, and unrelated browsing. Even when she sat at her desk for hours, very little meaningful work was completed. At night she felt guilty and overwhelmed because she knew she was capable of more, yet her mind rarely stayed focused long enough to perform at her best. One evening after missing an important assignment deadline, Abigail sat quietly in the library feeling frustrated with herself. She realized that her problem was not lack of intelligence or ambition. Her problem was that she had trained herself to become distracted constantly. Her mind no longer knew how to stay with one task deeply for very long. That realization became the beginning of a major shift in the way she approached work and attention. Instead of trying to force herself to work harder, Abigail started protecting her focus intentionally. She turned off unnecessary notifications, created distraction-free study periods, and stopped multitasking during important work. At first, the silence felt uncomfortable because her brain was so accustomed to constant stimulation. But gradually, her concentration improved. She noticed that tasks which once took 3 distracted hours could often be completed in one deeply focused hour. More importantly, she felt calmer mentally because her attention was no longer being pulled in multiple directions all day. This is the hidden power of focus. It does not only improve productivity, it also improves mental clarity and emotional stability. A focused mind feels calmer because it is fully engaged in one meaningful direction instead of constantly fragmented. Many people live in a permanent state of mental tension because their attention is always divided. They rarely experience full presence anywhere because their minds are continuously overstimulated. Guarding your focus requires understanding that attention is limited. Every distraction carries a cost. Every interruption forces the brain to spend energy refocusing again. Over time, constant interruptions weaken your ability to think deeply, solve problems creatively, and produce meaningful work. This is why highly productive people often protect their attention aggressively. They understand that focus is not automatic anymore. It must be defended intentionally. One of the biggest enemies of focus is multitasking. Many people believe multitasking makes them more efficient, but in reality, the brain performs far better when fully concentrated on one important task at a time. Constantly switching attention creates mental fatigue and reduces the quality of work. A distracted hour rarely produces the same results as a focused hour. Your environment also influences your ability to concentrate. Cluttered spaces, non-stop notifications, loud environments, and easy access to distractions all weaken focus gradually. Productive people intentionally create environments that support concentration instead of constantly fighting against it. Sometimes small environmental changes create dramatic improvements in mental clarity. It is important to understand that focus is like a muscle. The more consistently you practice deep concentration, the stronger it becomes. At first, sustained focus may feel difficult because the mind has been conditioned toward distraction for so long. But with repetition, mental endurance improves. You begin feeling more comfortable staying present with important work, without constantly seeking stimulation. A meaningful future requires attention. Goals, relationships, creativity, discipline, and growth all depend on your ability to direct focus intentionally. If your attention remains scattered constantly, your life eventually becomes scattered as well. But when you learn to guard your focus ruthlessly, your mind becomes sharper, your work becomes stronger, and your life begins moving with greater clarity and purpose. The modern world will continue fighting for your attention every day, but your future will depend heavily on whether you allow distraction to control your mind or whether you intentionally decide what deserves your focus most. Chapter 7. Work deep instead of living distracted. Modern life trains people to think in fragments. Attention jumps rapidly from one thing to another until the mind becomes conditioned for interruption instead of concentration. Many individuals spend entire days switching between messages, emails, notifications, meetings, and entertainment without ever fully entering a state of deep thought. As a result, they remain mentally busy but creatively shallow. They work constantly, yet struggle to produce meaningful results because true progress often requires uninterrupted focus for extended periods of time. Deep work has become rare because distraction has become normal. People are surrounded by systems designed to break concentration repeatedly. The average person checks their phone countless times each day, often without even realizing it. Silence feels uncomfortable. Waiting feels uncomfortable. Mental stillness feels unfamiliar. The brain becomes addicted to stimulation because quick distraction provides immediate emotional relief. But the price of constant distraction is enormous. It weakens creativity, lowers the quality of work, and slowly destroys the ability to think deeply about anything important. Meaningful work requires depth, because important ideas rarely appear instantly. Strong thinking develops gradually through concentration. Creativity often appears after the mind stays engaged with a problem long enough to move beyond surface-level thought. But many people never reach that depth, because interruptions constantly reset their attention before momentum fully develops. Their minds remain trapped at a shallow level of thinking, where they react quickly but rarely reflect deeply. Nathan Briggs understood this problem during his years working as a software engineer in Seattle. At 33 years old, He worked for a growing technology company where speed and responsiveness were constantly emphasized. His days were filled with endless notifications, team chats, emails, and overlapping projects. He prided himself on multitasking and staying available at all times. But despite working long hours, Nathan increasingly felt frustrated with the quality of his work. He struggled to concentrate deeply on difficult coding problems because interruptions constantly broke his focus. At first, he assumed this constant distraction was simply part of modern work culture. Everyone around him seemed equally scattered and overwhelmed. But over time, Nathan noticed something important. His best ideas almost always appeared during rare moments of uninterrupted concentration. On the few occasions when he worked quietly for long periods without distractions, his productivity and creativity improved dramatically. Problems that felt impossible during distracted work sessions suddenly became manageable when his mind had space to think deeply. One weekend, while working alone on a personal project, away from notifications and workplace interruptions, Nathan experienced several hours of complete concentration. When he finally stopped, he realized he had accomplished more meaningful work in one focused afternoon than he often accomplished during several distracted days at the office. That realization changed the way he viewed productivity permanently. He understood that constant connectivity was not making him more effective. It was weakening his ability to think deeply. From that point forward, Nathan began restructuring the way he worked. He created distraction-free work periods, limited unnecessary communication during deep tasks, and stopped allowing constant notifications to control his attention. At first, the change felt uncomfortable because he had become so accustomed to constant stimulation, but gradually his concentration improved. More importantly, he noticed something unexpected. Deep work not only improved his productivity, it also brought a sense of satisfaction and calm that distracted work never provided. This is one of the hidden benefits of deep concentration. It creates a feeling of mental presence that many people rarely experience anymore. When attention becomes fully absorbed in meaningful work, the mind feels clearer and less fragmented. Time moves differently. Stress often decreases because the brain is no longer constantly shifting between unrelated inputs. Deep work creates mental immersion, and immersion often produces both stronger results and greater fulfillment. Living distracted, on the other hand, creates a constant sense of mental fragmentation. A distracted person rarely feels fully present because their attention is continuously divided. They may appear busy externally, but internally they feel scattered, overwhelmed, and mentally fatigued. Over time, this weakens both productivity and emotional well-being. One of the biggest obstacles to deep work is the false belief that being constantly available equals being productive. Many people feel guilty disconnecting from messages or stepping away from interruptions because modern culture rewards immediate responsiveness. But true productivity is not measured by how quickly you respond to distractions. It is measured by the quality of what you create and complete over time. Deep work also requires intentional rituals. Productive people often create environments and routines that signal focus to the brain. This may involve working in silence, removing devices temporarily, setting specific hours for concentrated work, or creating consistent routines before beginning important tasks. These rituals help train the mind towards sustained concentration instead of constant interruption. It is important to remember that deep focus feels difficult at first because the brain has often been conditioned toward distraction for years. Many people become uncomfortable after only a few minutes of uninterrupted work because their minds crave stimulation, but concentration strengthens with practice. The more you protect focused work periods, the more natural deep thinking becomes over time. A meaningful life cannot be built entirely through fragmented attention. Important goals require depth. Strong relationships require presence. Creativity requires uninterrupted thought. Personal growth requires reflection. If your attention remains constantly scattered, your life eventually becomes scattered too. The ability to work deeply is becoming increasingly valuable because so few people protect it anymore. Those who learn to concentrate deeply in a distracted world gain an enormous advantage, not only professionally, but mentally and emotionally as well. Because when you stop living in constant distraction and begin working with depth and intention, your mind becomes sharper, your work becomes more meaningful, and your life begins moving with far greater clarity. Chapter 8. Simplify your life before it overwhelms you. Complexity quietly drains energy. The more cluttered your life becomes, the harder it becomes to think clearly, focus deeply, and move intentionally. Many people live surrounded by physical mess, overloaded schedules, endless obligations, mental noise, and constant stimulation without realizing how heavily these things affect their emotional state. Over time, unnecessary complexity creates exhaustion because the mind is forced to process too much information, too many decisions, and too many distractions every single day. One of the hidden causes of stress is decision overload. From the moment people wake up, their attention is pulled toward countless choices, responsibilities, notifications, and interruptions. Modern life encourages accumulation, more information, more entertainment, more commitments, more possessions, more obligations, but more is not always better. Sometimes more simply creates mental chaos. A crowded life often produces a crowded mind. This is why simplicity is powerful. Simplicity creates clarity. It removes unnecessary friction from daily life, so attention and energy can be directed toward what truly matters. Simplifying does not mean becoming lazy or avoiding responsibility. It means intentionally reducing the things that drain focus without adding meaningful value. It means organizing life in a way that supports peace, concentration, and effectiveness instead of constant overwhelm. Brooke Ellis understood this truth during one of the busiest periods of her life. At 35 years old, she worked full-time as an administrative coordinator in Minneapolis while raising 2 young children alone. Every day felt rushed from beginning to end. Mornings were chaotic. Her home constantly felt disorganized. Her calendar was overloaded with responsibilities, errands, appointments, and commitments. Even when she completed tasks, new demands immediately appeared. She often felt emotionally exhausted before the day was even halfway finished. At first, Brooke believed her stress was simply unavoidable because of how busy life had become. But gradually, she noticed that many of the things overwhelming her were not truly essential. Her home was filled with clutter she rarely used. Her schedule contained obligations she accepted out of guilt instead of necessity. She constantly checked emails and messages throughout the day, leaving her mind unable to fully relax. Even her evenings were consumed by noise and distraction because silence felt unfamiliar. One weekend, after spending hours cleaning and reorganizing a small section of her apartment, Brooke noticed something surprising. The cleaner and simpler environment made her feel calmer mentally. That small experience caused her to reflect more deeply on the condition of her entire life. She realized she had slowly allowed unnecessary complexity to invade nearly every part of her daily routine. Her mind felt overwhelmed because her life itself had become overwhelming. That realization became the beginning of gradual but meaningful change. Brooke started simplifying intentionally. She reduced unnecessary commitments, organized her home more carefully, planned her week in advance, and stopped saying yes to things that constantly drained her energy. She simplified meal routines, reduced digital distractions, and created small moments of quiet during the day where her mind could breathe without constant stimulation. None of these changes solved every problem immediately, but together they dramatically improved her mental clarity and emotional stability. Many people underestimate how deeply their environment affects their productivity and emotional health. Cluttered spaces create subtle stress because unfinished visual information constantly competes for attention. Overloaded schedules create mental tension because the brain feels permanently rushed. Too many obligations create emotional fatigue because attention becomes divided in too many directions at once. Simplicity removes unnecessary mental weight. One of the biggest mistakes people make is assuming every opportunity, invitation, responsibility, or piece of information deserves equal attention. But every commitment carries a cost. Every obligation consumes time, energy, and focus. If you never intentionally filter what enters your life, your mind eventually becomes overcrowded. Productivity suffers because the brain struggles to focus clearly inside constant mental clutter. Simplifying also requires learning the power of boundaries. Many people become overwhelmed because they say yes too often. They accept responsibilities that do not align with their priorities. They allow other people's urgency to constantly dictate their schedules. Over time, they lose control over their own time and energy. Intentional living requires deciding what truly deserves space in your life and what does not. Digital overload has become another major source of unnecessary complexity. Endless information, non-stop entertainment, constant notifications, and social comparison flood the mind every day. People consume far more information than their brains can process meaningfully, then wonder why they feel mentally exhausted and emotionally scattered. Simplicity often requires reducing unnecessary input, so the mind can think clearly again. One of the greatest benefits of simplicity is that it creates room for presence. A simpler life allows you to focus more deeply on fewer things instead of spreading your attention endlessly across everything. Relationships improve because you become more mentally present. Work improves because concentration becomes easier. Emotional health improves because the nervous system experiences less constant stimulation. Simplifying your life is not about removing joy or ambition. It is about removing unnecessary noise, so what truly matters can receive your best energy and attention. A complicated life often creates distraction and exhaustion, but a simpler life creates clarity, peace, and intentionality. The truth is that many people are not overwhelmed because they are incapable. They are overwhelmed because their lives contain too much unnecessary mental weight. And sometimes the most productive thing you can do is not adding more systems, more goals, or more effort. Sometimes the most powerful transformation begins by removing what no longer deserves space in your life. Chapter 9. Finish what most people abandon. Starting something feels exciting. Finishing it often feels difficult. That is why so many people live surrounded by unfinished goals, unfinished projects, unfinished plans, and unfinished versions of themselves. In the beginning, motivation creates energy and excitement. New ideas feel inspiring because they offer possibility without discomfort yet attached to them. But eventually, every meaningful goal reaches a stage where excitement fades and discipline becomes necessary. This is the point where most people quietly walk away. Unfinished work creates more than missed opportunity. It also weakens self-trust. Every time a person repeatedly abandons commitments, their mind slowly begins losing confidence in their own ability to follow through. They stop fully believing themselves when they make promises about change, growth, or future goals, because past patterns have trained them to expect inconsistency. Over time, this creates frustration and emotional disappointment that quietly affects confidence in every area of life. One of the greatest differences between highly effective people and constantly distracted people is not talent alone. It is completion. Effective people develop the ability to continue moving forward after motivation disappears. They understand that meaningful progress often becomes repetitive, uncomfortable, and emotionally difficult before results appear. But instead of escaping discomfort, they learn how to work through it consistently. Tyler Vaughn struggled with this problem for years. At 30 years old, he lived in Charlotte and worked as a sales associate for a home improvement company. Tyler was intelligent, ambitious, and full of ideas. He constantly talked about future business plans, creative projects, and new opportunities he wanted to pursue. Friends admired his enthusiasm because he always seemed inspired by something new. But privately, Tyler carried growing frustration with himself because very little ever reached completion. Every few months, he became obsessed with a new goal. He would buy courses, create plans, and work intensely for short periods of time. But eventually, the excitement faded. Once progress became slow or uncomfortable, Distractions pulled his attention elsewhere. Half-finished business ideas, abandoned fitness routines, incomplete online courses, and unfinished creative projects slowly piled up around his life. At first, Tyler blamed bad timing and lack of opportunity, but deep down, he knew the real problem was inconsistency. One evening, after cleaning out old files on his laptop, Tyler discovered dozens of unfinished projects from previous years, business plans that were never completed, creative ideas that were never developed, goals that were abandoned almost immediately after the initial excitement disappeared. Sitting there looking through years of unfinished effort, he felt something painful but important. He realized he had developed a habit of abandoning himself every time things became difficult. That realization changed the way he viewed discipline completely. Tyler began understanding that success is not built only through intelligence or inspiration. It is built through sustained follow-through. He realized he had spent years addicted to beginnings because beginnings felt emotionally exciting. Finishing required patience, repetition, boredom, uncertainty and discomfort, all the things he constantly tried to avoid. This is one of the hidden reasons many people struggle to complete meaningful work. Finishing requires emotional endurance. It requires continuing after novelty disappears. Many people enjoy the emotional high of starting, but resist the slower middle phase, where discipline matters more than excitement. Yet the middle is where growth actually happens. Skills improve in the middle. Confidence grows in the middle. Results are built in the middle. Procrastination is often deeply connected to emotional avoidance. People delay important work, not always because they are lazy, but because the task creates discomfort. Fear of failure, fear of imperfection, boredom, self-doubt, and overwhelm all contribute to avoidance. The mind naturally seeks easier stimulation because difficult focused work feels emotionally demanding. This is why many individuals escape into entertainment, scrolling, or busy work instead of confronting important tasks directly. One of the most powerful things you can do for your confidence is begin finishing small commitments consistently. Completion strengthens identity. Every time you follow through on something important, you send a message to your mind that you are capable of discipline and consistency. Over time, these repeated experiences build self-trust, and self-trust changes everything, because productive people do not constantly waste energy doubting themselves. Learning to tolerate discomfort is also essential for completion. Important work will not always feel exciting. Some days progress feels slow. Some days concentration feels difficult. Some days motivation disappears completely. But disciplined people understand that temporary discomfort is not a signal to quit. It is simply part of the process. They continue moving forward even when emotions fluctuate. It is also important to stop constantly chasing perfection. Many unfinished goals are abandoned because people become discouraged when progress looks imperfect. They expect rapid results, then lose confidence when reality becomes slower and messier than imagined. But meaningful achievement rarely happens cleanly. Mistakes, delays, frustration, and uncertainty are normal parts of long-term progress. A finished, imperfect project creates far more value than endless perfect intentions. Completion creates momentum because it proves progress is possible. People who consistently finish things develop emotional resilience because they learn how to move through difficulty instead of escaping it repeatedly. Your future will not be shaped only by what you start. It will be shaped by what you continue long enough to complete. Every unfinished promise weakens momentum slightly. Every completed commitment strengthens it. And over time, the habit of finishing what others abandon becomes one of the most valuable forms of discipline you can develop in a distracted world. Chapter 10. Starve the noise and feed your mind clarity. The modern world is loud in ways previous generations never experienced. Noise no longer comes only from crowded streets or busy environments. It now follows people everywhere through screens, notifications, advertisements, opinions, headlines, videos, entertainment, and endless streams of information. Many individuals consume more content in a single day than earlier generations consumed in weeks. The mind rarely gets silence anymore. As a result, people often feel mentally exhausted without fully understanding why. Constant noise weakens clarity because the brain never has enough quiet space to process thoughts deeply. Many people wake up and immediately begin consuming information before their minds are fully awake. Throughout the day, they continue feeding themselves endless stimulation. Even moments of boredom or stillness are quickly filled with scrolling, videos, music, or distraction. Over time, this constant input overwhelms the mind and makes clear thinking more difficult. One of the greatest dangers of information overload is that it creates the illusion of learning while reducing reflection. People consume enormous amounts of content every day, but spend very little time thinking deeply about what truly matters. Their attention becomes trapped in endless mental consumption instead of intentional thought. This weakens creativity, decision-making, emotional stability, and productivity because the brain remains overstimulated constantly. Madison Avery experienced this problem gradually over several years. At 29 years old, she worked as a digital marketing specialist in Atlanta. Her career required her to stay connected online almost constantly. Every day she monitored social media trends, responded to messages, analyzed campaigns, and consumed endless online content. Outside work, her habits remained the same. She listened to podcasts while driving, scrolled through social media during meals, watched videos late into the night, and checked her phone constantly throughout the day. At first, Madison believed she was simply staying informed and productive. But slowly, she noticed changes in herself that became difficult to ignore. Her concentration weakened dramatically. She struggled to sit quietly without reaching for her phone. Reading books became difficult because her attention constantly drifted. Even during conversations with friends, she felt mentally distracted. What disturbed her most was the growing sense of mental fatigue she carried almost every day. Her mind felt crowded all the time. One evening, after spending nearly 2 hours scrolling online without remembering most of what she consumed, Madison suddenly felt emotionally drained. She realized that despite constantly feeding her mind information, she rarely felt mentally clear. In fact, the more content she consumed, the more overwhelmed and distracted she became. That realization forced her to confront something uncomfortable. Her mind was overloaded, not because she lacked intelligence, but because she lacked silence. That moment became the beginning of a major shift in her life. Madison started intentionally reducing unnecessary noise. She limited social media use outside work, spent more time reading slowly instead of endlessly scrolling, and created moments during the day where she allowed herself to think quietly, without stimulation. At first, the silence felt uncomfortable because her brain had become dependent on constant input. But gradually, something changed. Her thoughts became clearer. Her focus improved. Her anxiety decreased. For the first time in years, her mind no longer felt crowded all the time. This is one of the hidden powers of mental clarity. A clear mind performs better, thinks better, and feels calmer. Clarity allows people to make stronger decisions because their thoughts are not constantly buried beneath distraction and noise. Many individuals believe they need more information to improve their lives when, in reality, they need more space to think clearly about the information they already have. The human mind was never designed to process non-stop stimulation endlessly. Just as the body requires rest after physical effort, the mind requires periods of quiet recovery to function properly. But modern culture often treats silence as wasted time. People feel uncomfortable sitting alone with their thoughts because constant stimulation has trained them to avoid stillness. Yet stillness is often where clarity appears. Noise also weakens productivity because it fragments attention continuously. Every unnecessary input competes for mental energy. Endless content consumption may appear harmless, but over time, it reduces focus and emotional presence. A distracted mind struggles to think deeply because concentration is constantly interrupted by stimulation. Protecting your mind requires intentional filtering. Not every opinion deserves your attention. Not every headline deserves your emotional energy. Not every notification deserves immediate focus. Productive and emotionally healthy people become selective about what they allow into their minds because they understand that attention shapes emotional state and mental clarity. One of the most valuable habits you can develop is learning how to sit quietly without needing constant stimulation. Reflection strengthens self-awareness. Silence improves thinking. Deep concentration becomes easier when the mind is not overloaded constantly. Creativity often returns when mental noise decreases. Some of the clearest ideas people ever experience appear during moments of stillness rather than moments of overstimulation. This does not mean abandoning technology or disconnecting from the modern world completely. The goal is balance and intentionality. Technology becomes dangerous when it controls attention automatically instead of serving clear purposes consciously. A productive life requires knowing when to consume information and when to disconnect from it. Your mind becomes shaped by what you feed it repeatedly. Endless noise creates distraction and emotional fatigue, but intentional silence creates clarity, focus, and peace. If you want to improve the quality of your thinking, your productivity, and your emotional well-being, you must learn to protect your mind from unnecessary overload. A noisy world will constantly compete for your attention, but the people who learn to create clarity within that noise gain something increasingly rare: the ability to think deeply, focus fully, and live intentionally, instead of becoming mentally consumed by endless distraction. Chapter 11. Design your days before distractions do it for you. A person's future is often shaped by how their ordinary days are structured, not by occasional bursts of motivation, but by the repeated routines, habits, and priorities that quietly guide daily life over time. Many people underestimate how much their schedule influences their mental state, productivity, relationships, and long-term direction. They move through their days reacting to whatever appears in front of them, without realizing that every unplanned day becomes vulnerable to distraction, urgency, and wasted energy. When life lacks intentional structure, distractions naturally take control. Other people's priorities begin filling your time. Notifications interrupt focus. Small tasks consume entire hours. Important goals slowly get pushed aside because urgent distractions always feel more immediate. Over time, many individuals become busy managing daily chaos while making very little meaningful progress toward the future they actually want. This is why intentional scheduling matters so deeply. A schedule is not meant to create rigidity or eliminate freedom. Its purpose is to protect what matters most from constant interruption. A well-structured day creates clarity because important priorities are already decided in advance. Instead of constantly reacting emotionally throughout the day, intentional people guide their time with purpose. Connor Whitfield understood the consequences of unstructured living during one of the busiest seasons of his career. At 41 years old, he worked as a financial advisor in Dallas. His workdays felt non-stop from morning until late evening. Client meetings, phone calls, paperwork, emails, and last-minute requests consumed nearly every hour. Outside work, his personal life felt equally disorganized. He rarely exercised consistently, skipped meals frequently, and struggled to spend meaningful time with his family because his schedule constantly felt out of control. At first, Connor assumed his stress simply came with success. Everyone around him seemed overwhelmed too. But privately, he felt increasingly frustrated because despite working constantly, he rarely felt fully present anywhere. At work, he worried about unfinished responsibilities. At home, he thought about work. Even during weekends, his mind remained mentally crowded with unfinished tasks and future pressures. His life felt reactive, rushed, and emotionally exhausting. One evening, after missing his daughter's school event because of another last-minute work emergency, Connor experienced a moment that deeply unsettled him. Sitting alone in his office afterward, he realized something painful. He had spent years allowing urgency to dictate nearly every part of his life. He kept promising himself that things would eventually calm down, yet his schedule continued becoming more chaotic every year because nothing was intentionally changing. That realization forced him to rethink the way he approached time completely. Instead of allowing every day to unfold randomly, Connor began structuring his life more intentionally. He started planning his weeks in advance, creating focused work blocks, scheduling family time deliberately, and protecting certain hours from unnecessary interruptions. He also began prioritizing recovery instead of treating rest as optional. At first, the structure felt unfamiliar because he was so accustomed to constant reaction, but gradually, his life became calmer and more focused because his priorities finally had boundaries protecting them. One of the biggest mistakes people make is treating important things casually while treating distractions urgently. Health, relationships, deep work, personal growth, and long-term goals often receive whatever time remains after everything else is finished. But distractions expand endlessly when boundaries do not exist. If you do not intentionally protect important priorities, less meaningful demands will quietly consume your schedule. Intentional scheduling also reduces decision fatigue. Every unplanned day forces the brain to constantly make choices in real time. What should I focus on now? What deserves attention first? What can wait? Over time, constant decision-making drains mental energy. But when important priorities are planned ahead, the mind becomes calmer because clarity already exists before distractions appear. This does not mean every minute of life must be rigidly controlled. Flexibility remains important because unexpected situations will always arise. The goal is not perfection. The goal is intentionality. A structured life simply creates direction, so distractions no longer dominate your attention automatically. Protecting focus time is especially important in a distracted world. Many people attempt meaningful work while remaining fully available to interruptions. As a result, concentration weakens and productivity declines. Intentional people understand that deep work requires protected space. They create periods where their attention belongs fully to what matters instead of constantly shifting toward interruptions. Rest must also become part of intentional structure. Modern productivity culture often glorifies exhaustion and non-stop work, but sustainable productivity requires recovery. A constantly overloaded schedule eventually weakens focus, creativity, emotional stability, and health. Rest is not wasted time. It is part of maintaining long-term effectiveness and mental clarity. One of the most powerful things you can do is begin treating your time as something valuable instead of endlessly available. Every hour of your day represents part of your life itself. When time is wasted carelessly, life is wasted quietly. Intentional scheduling forces you to confront what truly deserves your attention and what simply steals energy without adding meaningful value. Your daily routines are shaping your future, whether you realize it or not. A distracted day, repeated often enough, becomes a distracted life. But intentional days, repeated consistently, create focus, stability, and meaningful progress over time. If you do not design your days carefully, the modern world will gladly design them for you through distraction, urgency, and endless interruption. But when you begin organizing your life intentionally, your time becomes aligned with your values, your focus becomes stronger, and your future starts moving in the direction you consciously choose, instead of the direction distraction decides for you. Chapter 12. Learn to produce without destroying yourself. Modern productivity culture often sends a dangerous message: work harder, sleep less, stay available constantly, and push yourself endlessly if you want success. Exhaustion has become something people almost wear proudly, as though burnout is proof of ambition. Many individuals spend years believing that sacrificing their health, peace of mind, relationships, and emotional stability is simply the price of achievement. But eventually, the human mind and body begin resisting a lifestyle built entirely on pressure and depletion. Burnout rarely happens suddenly. It develops quietly over time through chronic stress, emotional overload, poor recovery, and constant mental tension. At first, people ignore the warning signs because they still manage to function. They continue working through exhaustion, convincing themselves they will rest later. But eventually, productivity begins weakening because the mind can no longer sustain constant pressure without recovery. Focus declines. Motivation disappears. Emotional patience weakens. Even simple responsibilities start feeling heavy. One of the biggest misunderstandings about productivity is the belief that doing more always creates better results. In reality, exhausted people often work inefficiently because mental clarity, creativity, and focus deteriorate under constant stress. A burned-out mind struggles to think deeply, solve problems clearly, or sustain long-term discipline. Sustainable productivity requires energy management, not endless self-destruction. Jenna Holloway learned this lesson during her years working as a healthcare operations manager in Tampa. At 37 years old, she managed large teams, demanding schedules, and constant administrative pressure inside a busy medical facility. She took pride in being dependable. No matter how stressful the situation became, Jenna always pushed herself harder. She answered emails late at night, skipped breaks regularly, worked through weekends, and constantly prioritized work over personal recovery. At first, her dedication earned praise from coworkers and supervisors. She became known as someone who could handle enormous pressure without slowing down. But privately, Jenna's life was becoming emotionally unsustainable. She slept poorly, stopped exercising, and rarely spent time doing anything that restored her mentally. Even when she was physically at home, her mind remained trapped at work. She constantly worried about responsibilities, unfinished tasks, and future problems. Gradually, the emotional exhaustion became impossible to ignore. Small problems started feeling overwhelming. Her patience disappeared quickly. She struggled to focus during meetings and often reread emails multiple times because her concentration had weakened so badly. The most painful part was that she no longer felt connected to the work she once cared deeply about. She felt emotionally numb, mentally drained, and constantly exhausted no matter how much she tried to rest. One afternoon, after forgetting an important meeting entirely, something she had never done before, Jenna sat alone in her office feeling deeply frustrated with herself. For the first time, she admitted something she had avoided for years. She was not simply tired, she was burned out. Her body and mind had been running under constant pressure for so long that they could no longer recover properly. That realization changed the way she viewed productivity forever. Jenna began understanding that constantly sacrificing herself was not strength. It was imbalance. She started rebuilding healthier boundaries into her life. She reduced unnecessary work after hours, prioritized sleep, returned to exercise gradually, and created moments of recovery during the week instead of waiting for complete exhaustion before resting. Most importantly, she stopped measuring her worth entirely through output and constant availability. Over time, something surprising happened. Her productivity actually improved. Her thinking became clearer. Her patience returned. Her work quality increased because her mind was no longer functioning under constant emotional depletion. Jenna realized that sustainable productivity requires balance between effort and recovery. A constantly exhausted person cannot consistently perform at their best. Many people fear slowing down because they believe rest will make them lazy or less successful. But meaningful recovery is not laziness. Recovery restores focus, creativity, emotional stability, and long-term performance. Even athletes understand this principle clearly. Muscles grow during recovery, not during non-stop strain. The human mind operates similarly. Constant pressure without rest eventually creates breakdown instead of growth. One of the hidden dangers of burnout is that people often normalize it because everyone around them appears equally overwhelmed. Entire cultures and workplaces sometimes celebrate unhealthy levels of stress and overwork. But just because exhaustion has become common does not mean it is healthy or sustainable. Many individuals are sacrificing years of emotional well-being for productivity systems that eventually weaken the quality of both their work and their lives. Learning to produce without destroying yourself requires boundaries. You must accept that your energy is limited and valuable. Not every task deserves immediate attention. Not every opportunity deserves your health. Not every demand deserves access to your peace of mind. Intentional people understand that protecting energy is part of maintaining long-term effectiveness. Rest also becomes more powerful when it is intentional. Endless distraction is not true recovery. Many people spend hours consuming entertainment, while remaining mentally overstimulated the entire time. Real recovery often includes sleep, movement, quiet, reflection, meaningful relationships, and moments where the nervous system can actually calm down instead of remaining overloaded constantly. You must also stop attaching your identity entirely to productivity. Your worth as a human being is not measured only by output. People who tie all their value to performance often become emotionally trapped because they never allow themselves permission to rest without guilt. But sustainable success requires emotional health as much as discipline. A productive life should improve your well-being, not destroy it. True productivity creates freedom, clarity, and purpose. It allows you to build meaningful work while still protecting your health, relationships, and peace of mind. Because success loses much of its value when the process of achieving it leaves you mentally exhausted, emotionally disconnected, and unable to enjoy the life you worked so hard to build. Chapter 13. Become someone who executes consistently. Ideas are common. Intentions are common. Plans, goals, promises, and motivation are everywhere. But consistent execution is rare. Many people know exactly what they should do to improve their lives, yet they struggle to follow through repeatedly. They start strong, lose momentum, and eventually return to familiar habits again. Over time, this cycle creates frustration because deep down they know their potential is greater than their current behavior. The problem is not always lack of knowledge. Often, the problem is inconsistency. Execution matters because life responds to action, not intention alone. A person can spend years talking about goals without changing anything meaningful. Thinking about success is not the same as building it. Planning can become another form of avoidance when action never follows. Real progress happens when behavior becomes aligned with priorities consistently over time, even during difficult or emotionally unmotivated days. One of the biggest reasons people struggle with execution is that they negotiate too much with themselves. They constantly ask themselves whether they feel like doing the work, instead of treating important actions as non-negotiable responsibilities. Their emotions decide their discipline. When motivation feels high, they perform well. When motivation disappears, so does their consistency. This creates unstable progress because emotions naturally fluctuate. Dominic Hayes understood this pattern better than anyone around him realized. At 32 years old, he worked as a sales consultant in Phoenix. Dominic was naturally charismatic, intelligent, and talented with people. Managers often praised his communication skills and potential, but despite his ability, his performance remained inconsistent year after year. Some months he exceeded expectations dramatically. Other months he lost focus completely, missed opportunities, and struggled to maintain basic discipline. What frustrated Dominic most was that he knew he was capable of more. He constantly set ambitious goals for himself. He bought books, attended seminars, and made promises about becoming more disciplined. But eventually, old habits always returned. He stayed up too late, wasted time online, delayed important tasks, and avoided uncomfortable work when motivation dropped. Over time, his confidence weakened because he no longer fully trusted his own promises. One afternoon, after missing an important sales target again, Dominic had an honest conversation with his supervisor. Instead of criticizing his talent, the supervisor said something simple that stayed with him for years. "Your problem isn't ability. Your problem is that you only execute consistently when you feel inspired." That sentence forced Dominic to confront something painful but true. He had built his life around emotional motivation instead of disciplined execution. From that point forward, Dominic stopped focusing so heavily on motivation and began focusing on identity instead. Instead of asking, "How do I feel today?" he started asking, What would a disciplined person do today regardless of emotion? That small mental shift changed the way he approached work completely. He created routines, committed to daily standards, and stopped negotiating with himself constantly about basic responsibilities. At first, the process felt uncomfortable because discipline often does. But gradually, Dominic noticed something powerful happening. Every time he followed through despite not feeling motivated, his self-respect increased slightly. Every completed commitment strengthened self-trust. Over time, consistency became less dependent on emotion because disciplined action slowly became part of his identity. This is one of the most important truths about productivity and personal growth. Behavior shapes identity. The actions you repeat consistently become evidence for the type of person you believe yourself to be. When you repeatedly avoid difficult work, your confidence weakens because your mind learns inconsistency. But when you repeatedly follow through on commitments, even during difficult days, your identity strengthens. Execution also requires emotional resilience. Meaningful work will not always feel exciting or inspiring. Some days focus feels difficult. Some days progress feels slow. Some days you question yourself entirely. But disciplined people understand that temporary emotions do not deserve permanent control over important goals. They continue acting with intention, even when feelings fluctuate. One of the biggest traps people fall into is waiting to feel ready before taking action. But readiness often develops through movement, not before it. Confidence grows through repeated execution. Momentum builds through consistent effort. Many people remain stuck because they endlessly prepare instead of practicing disciplined action regularly. It is also important to stop overcomplicating productivity. Consistency is often built through simple repeated actions performed daily. Waking up on time, beginning important work without delay, following routines, completing responsibilities, protecting focus, resting intentionally. These behaviors may appear ordinary individually, but over time they create extraordinary results because consistency compounds quietly. Execution becomes easier when your standards become clearer. Undisciplined people often rely on mood. Disciplined people rely on decisions already made. They reduce internal negotiation by deciding in advance how they will behave. This removes emotional confusion during difficult moments because standards already exist. You must also understand that discipline is not punishment. Discipline creates freedom. A disciplined mind experiences less chaos because important responsibilities are handled consistently instead of constantly postponed. Procrastination creates stress. Avoidance creates guilt. Inconsistency creates frustration. But disciplined execution creates clarity, momentum, and peace of mind. Your future will not be shaped mainly by your potential. It will be shaped by your repeated actions. Potential means very little without execution. Many talented people remain stuck because they never develop the ability to follow through consistently. Meanwhile, disciplined individuals often outperform more talented people simply because they continue showing up long after motivation disappears. At some point you must decide whether you want to continue being someone who talks about change or someone who lives it daily. Because the quality of your future will depend heavily on whether disciplined execution becomes something you occasionally attempt or something you consistently practice until it becomes part of who you are. Chapter 14. Change your habits. Change your entire life. A person's life is often shaped less by dramatic moments and more by repeated daily behavior. Small actions may appear insignificant in the moment, but over time they quietly build identity, direction, health, mindset, and future results. Habits are powerful because they operate automatically. Once behaviors become repeated consistently enough, they begin shaping life without requiring constant decision-making. This is why both positive and negative habits carry enormous long-term consequences. Many people underestimate the impact of their routines because change usually happens gradually. Unhealthy habits rarely destroy a life overnight. Instead, they slowly weaken energy, focus, discipline, confidence, and emotional stability little by little. In the same way, Productive habits rarely transform life instantly, but repeated over months and years, small intentional actions begin creating massive differences in results, mindset, and quality of life. The danger is that habits become invisible after repetition. People stop noticing behaviors they practice daily because routines feel normal. A person may spend years waking up distracted, procrastinating important work, neglecting health, consuming endless stimulation, and living reactively without fully recognizing how deeply those patterns are shaping their future. Eventually, the results of repeated habits appear externally through stress, inconsistency, exhaustion, poor focus, and unfulfilled goals. Hannah Mercer experienced this reality during one of the most frustrating periods of her life. At 34 years old, she worked as an administrative coordinator for a manufacturing company in Indianapolis. Her life looked relatively stable from the outside, but internally she felt overwhelmed and emotionally scattered almost every day. She constantly struggled to stay organized, delayed responsibilities until the last minute, and felt mentally exhausted most evenings. Despite wanting change, she repeatedly fell back into the same unhealthy routines. Hannah often blamed herself harshly for lacking discipline. She believed major transformation required dramatic motivation or extreme effort. So every few months, she created ambitious plans to completely rebuild her life overnight. She attempted strict schedules, unrealistic goals, and intense routines all at once. But eventually the pressure became overwhelming, and she abandoned everything again. Each failure weakened her confidence further because she started believing she simply lacked the ability to stay consistent. One evening after arriving home mentally drained from another chaotic day, Hannah noticed something important while looking around her apartment. The problem was not one massive failure. The problem was hundreds of small habits quietly shaping her life every day. Sleeping too late, starting mornings reactively, constantly checking her phone, avoiding planning, leaving tasks unfinished, eating carelessly, delaying responsibilities. None of these behaviors seemed disastrous individually, but together they were creating the exhausting life she was living. That realization changed her entire approach to growth. Instead of trying to reinvent herself dramatically overnight, Hannah began focusing on small, sustainable habit changes. She started waking up slightly earlier, preparing tasks the night before, reducing phone use in the morning, organizing her space gradually, and committing to small, consistent actions instead of extreme temporary effort. The progress felt slow at first, but something important happened. Because the habits were manageable, she actually maintained them. Over time, those small behaviors began changing her life more than her previous dramatic attempts ever had. Her mornings became calmer, her focus improved. Her stress decreased because fewer responsibilities piled up unnecessarily. Most importantly, her confidence slowly returned because she was finally proving to herself that consistency was possible. This is one of the most powerful truths about habits. Small repeated actions compound over time. The results may not feel dramatic immediately, but repetition quietly shapes identity. A person who exercises consistently for years builds a different future than someone who remains inactive. A person who protects focus daily builds stronger concentration than someone constantly distracted. A person who saves money consistently creates different financial outcomes than someone who spends impulsively. Tiny behaviors repeated long enough eventually create visible transformation. Habits also matter because they reduce dependence on motivation. Motivation naturally rises and falls, but routines continue even during emotionally difficult periods. Productive habits create structure that supports progress automatically instead of requiring constant willpower. This is why disciplined people often appear more consistent. Their lives are supported by routines, not temporary emotional energy alone. One important mistake people make is focusing too heavily on goals while ignoring the habits connected to those goals. Goals create direction, but habits create reality. Wanting a healthier body means very little without daily behaviors supporting health. Wanting greater productivity means very little without routines protecting focus and discipline. Lasting change happens when behavior changes repeatedly, not simply when intentions change temporarily. It is also important to understand that habits influence identity deeply. Every repeated behavior sends a message to your mind about who you are becoming. When you consistently follow through on small commitments, self-trust strengthens. When you repeatedly avoid responsibilities, confidence weakens. Identity is shaped gradually through repeated action. Many people become discouraged because progress feels too slow in the beginning. But meaningful growth often happens invisibly before results appear externally. Small disciplines may not feel life-changing after one day or one week, but over years they completely alter direction. Consistency compounds quietly until the difference between intentional living and reactive living becomes enormous. Changing your life does not always require dramatic reinvention. Often it begins through small repeated choices made daily. Better mornings, better focus, better boundaries, better routines, better decisions. Over time, those small improvements reshape entire futures. The quality of your life is closely connected to the quality of your habits, because habits determine what you repeatedly practice, and what you repeatedly practice eventually becomes who you are. Chapter 15. Build a life you don't need to escape from. Many people spend years chasing productivity without ever asking themselves a deeper question: what kind of life am I actually building? They become so focused on surviving responsibilities, reaching goals, and staying busy that they rarely stop long enough to examine whether their daily life feels meaningful, balanced, and emotionally sustainable. Productivity becomes another form of pressure instead of a tool for creating freedom, clarity, and purpose. Over time, they begin living in constant anticipation of escape, waiting for weekends, vacations, distractions, or temporary relief from lives that no longer feel aligned with who they truly want to become. This is one of the greatest dangers of modern life. People become efficient at maintaining routines that quietly drain them emotionally. They wake up tired, move through days distracted and overwhelmed, and collapse into exhaustion at night while telling themselves things will eventually improve later. But later often never arrives unless intentional change happens. A meaningful life is not built accidentally. It is built through conscious decisions repeated consistently over time. The purpose of productivity was never supposed to be endless busyness. True productivity should support a better life, not replace it. It should create space for peace, health, meaningful work, strong relationships, personal growth, and emotional stability. If achievement constantly comes at the cost of your well-being, your clarity, or your ability to enjoy life itself, then something important has become unbalanced. One of the most important things you can do is define success intentionally, instead of accepting definitions handed to you by culture, comparison, or external pressure. Many people spend years pursuing goals they never deeply questioned because society taught them those achievements represented success. More money, more status, more recognition, more productivity. But external achievement alone cannot create fulfillment if your inner life remains exhausted, disconnected, and overwhelmed. A meaningful life often looks simpler than people expect. It includes focused work, but also recovery, discipline, but also peace, ambition, but also presence. Productivity should help you become more intentional, not more emotionally trapped. The goal is not simply to do more. The goal is to live better. One reason people feel disconnected from their own lives is because they spend too much time reacting and too little time reflecting. Reflection creates awareness. It allows you to step back and honestly examine whether your habits, priorities, relationships, and routines are creating the kind of future you truly want. Without reflection, people drift. They continue repeating patterns automatically because slowing down long enough to think clearly feels uncomfortable in a distracted world. Building a life you do not need to escape from also requires learning the difference between meaningful effort and endless pressure. Hard work is valuable. Discipline matters deeply. But a life built entirely around stress eventually weakens the very person trying to sustain it. Sustainable success requires emotional balance. It requires protecting your health, your peace of mind, and your ability to remain fully present with the people and experiences that matter most. One of the greatest misconceptions about discipline is that discipline removes freedom. In reality, the opposite is often true. Undisciplined living creates chaos. Constant procrastination creates stress. Poor habits create exhaustion. Reactive living creates overwhelm. But disciplined systems create stability and clarity. They reduce unnecessary chaos, so your energy can move toward meaningful priorities instead of endless damage control. When your life becomes more intentional, simple things begin feeling different. Mornings feel calmer because your mind is not immediately consumed by distraction. Work feels more meaningful because your attention becomes focused instead of fragmented. Relationships improve because you become more mentally present instead of emotionally scattered. Even rest feels deeper because your mind is no longer trapped in non-stop overstimulation. You must also remember that no productivity system will permanently fix a life disconnected from purpose. Efficiency alone is not enough. Human beings need meaning. They need direction. They need to feel connected to something deeper than endless tasks and constant pressure. Productivity becomes powerful when it supports values that genuinely matter to you, instead of simply helping you move faster through a life you are emotionally disconnected from. As this audiobook comes to an end, one truth becomes increasingly clear. Your future will largely be shaped by the systems, habits, focus and priorities you practice repeatedly, not occasionally, but daily. Every choice either strengthens intentional living or strengthens distraction. Every habit either creates clarity or creates chaos. Every repeated action either moves you closer to the life you want or further away from it. You do not need to rebuild your entire life overnight. Meaningful change rarely happens that way. But you do need to become conscious of the direction your current routines are creating. A distracted life does not suddenly become focused accidentally. A chaotic life does not suddenly become peaceful automatically. Intentionality must be practiced. The modern world will continue competing aggressively for your attention, your time, your focus and your energy, but you still have the ability to decide what deserves access to your life. You can choose clarity over noise, presence over distraction, discipline over chaos, meaningful progress over endless busyness. And when you begin living with that level of intention consistently, productivity stops feeling like pressure and starts becoming something far more valuable, a tool for building a life that feels purposeful, peaceful, focused, and truly worth living. Conclusion. A distracted life rarely changes itself. Without intention, people slowly drift into routines that consume their energy, weaken their focus, and disconnect them from the future they truly want to build. Days become repetitive. Attention becomes fragmented. Important goals remain postponed while urgency, distraction, and mental overload quietly take control. Over time, many individuals begin feeling emotionally exhausted, not because they are incapable, but because they are living inside systems that constantly pull them away from clarity, discipline, and meaningful progress. Throughout this audiobook, you have explored a different way of approaching productivity and life itself. You have seen how busyness can create the illusion of progress while deeper priorities remain neglected. You have learned how modern distraction weakens attention, how reactive living destroys intentionality, and how small repeated habits quietly shape identity over time. You have also seen that meaningful productivity is not built through endless motivation, but through systems, focus, consistency, and intentional daily action. One of the most important truths to remember moving forward is that productivity is not really about doing more. It is about becoming more intentional with the energy, attention, and time you already have. A productive life is not a life filled with non-stop activity. It is a life where your actions align with what genuinely matters. It is a life where focus replaces distraction, clarity replaces chaos, and purpose replaces endless reaction. Modern life will continue competing aggressively for your attention every day. Notifications will continue interrupting you. Distractions will continue tempting you. Endless information will continue flooding your mind. The world profits heavily from keeping people overstimulated, reactive, emotionally exhausted, and mentally scattered. That is why protecting your focus has become one of the most important forms of self-respect in the modern world. You do not need to become perfect to create meaningful change. You simply need to become more conscious, more intentional, more disciplined about what deserves access to your time, energy, and mental space. Small, consistent changes often create the biggest long-term transformation. Better routines, better focus, better boundaries, better habits, better recovery. These simple improvements repeated over time quietly rebuild lives. It is also important to remember that growth rarely feels dramatic while it is happening. Many people become discouraged because progress appears slow in the beginning, but meaningful change often develops invisibly before it becomes obvious externally. A calmer mind, stronger focus, better self-control, greater consistency, more intentional thinking. These internal changes compound quietly until one day your life no longer feels controlled by distraction and reaction. You will still experience difficult days. There will still be moments when motivation disappears, distractions return, or old habits try to pull you backward. That is normal. The goal is not perfection. The goal is awareness and consistency. Productive people are not individuals who never struggle. They are individuals who continue returning to intentional action, even after difficult periods. As you move forward from this audiobook, remember that your future is being shaped daily through repeated behavior. Every routine strengthens something. Every habit builds something. Every choice either creates greater clarity or greater chaos. And over time, the direction of your life becomes the result of what you repeatedly practice. You have the ability to redesign the systems controlling your life. You can reclaim your attention. You can simplify your routines. You can strengthen your discipline. You can build healthier habits. You can protect your peace of mind. You can stop living reactively and begin living intentionally. A focused life creates different results from a distracted one. A disciplined life creates different results from a chaotic one. And an intentional life creates a different future from a life controlled entirely by urgency and noise. The quality of your future will depend greatly on whether you continue allowing distraction to shape your days, or whether you consciously decide to protect your focus, direct your energy wisely, and build systems that support the life you truly want. Because in the end, productivity is not only about work, it is about learning how to live with greater clarity, purpose, peace, and control over the direction of your own life.